My friend Richard Madeley is on hand, ready to talk. Hello, Richard.
Ready to talk. This is like one of those wind-up monkeys, sort
Yeah. Okay.
of.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. Talk. Before we get into our normal schedule of the stuff that we've discussed that we ought to talk about, Martin Bashir, and of course, as you pointed out, the kind of strange phantom lockdown that doesn't seem to really be happening, we have to talk about Des O'Connor, a television legend, a showbiz legend. You must have crossed swords with him now and again. Your thoughts?
Well, it's funny you talk about being ready to talk, and I was just thinking as the on news was going out, I was thinking about Des, and yeah, Judy and I never met him socially. We only ever crossed swords, as you put it, in what I suppose you could call his natural habitat, which was a television studio. So we probably interviewed him over the years, maybe half a dozen times for different reasons. He was launching different shows and a new album out, whatever. And the thing about Des was he was the ultimate live studio guest, because you know what it's like on live radio or live television. Things go down. The VT won't work, the adverts won't play, a guest doesn't turn up or get stuck in fog at the airport, whatever. And if you had Des on your show, you just knew that he could fill the whole show if necessary. He could flip from a mindset of say an 8-minute interview into the mindset of a 25-minute interview in a heartbeat. He was, as everybody's saying this morning, he was an utter professional. And the thing about that compliment of calling somebody professional, it kind of slightly takes away from their humanity. It makes them sound as if they were a bit of an automaton rather, that they could do things kind of almost sort of in their sleep and automatically. And Des wasn't like that. What you got from him was real. I've quoted this many times in this context, but it's what Clive James once said about broadcasting. He said that it's not what you say, it's how you come over. And that was Des's secret. He came over as himself. He was him. He was self-deprecating. He was funny. He did not take himself seriously at all. And there are so many people, you'll know this.
Yes, in showbiz,
yeah. Business
they think they're curing cancer, don't they? So many of people.
Absolutely. They think they're God's gift and the savior of the planet. They really do. There are a couple of them, I'm not going to name them, there are a couple of them on Strictly at the moment, and you can see it in their faces. They think they're wonderful. And, they're not. They're just like the rest of us. As Ben Elton once said, everyone's a farty, really, when it comes down to it. Everybody farts in the bath. And Des O'Connor probably had 6 jokes of that description. But I was very fond of him as a fellow professional, as it were. I didn't know him personally, but my contact with him professionally was never anything but dealing with a consummate expert. He just knew what he was doing, and he could do anything. He could sing, he could do a chat show, he could do a comedy routine. He was old school, and there was never anyone quite like Des. And in terms of that broad remit in entertainment, there aren't any of him left. He was the last of a generation.
Yeah, and he trod lightly, didn't he? I mean, he looked like a guy who was just laughing away and having fun and not taking it at all seriously, as you said. But actually, beneath that was a consummate professional at work, delivering excellent performances every time.
Well, you and I are old enough to remember him appearing frequently as the butt of the joke on Morecambe and Wise.
Yes, yes.
The running gag about Des O'Connor. I mean, they were always joking about him, but occasionally he'd make an appearance, he'd go on the show himself. And yes, it looked slightly chaotic, and he looked slightly sort of off balance and confused by their mockery, but he wasn't at all. It was a consummate performance. His timing. I mean, the one thing comedians have to have in abundance is perfect timing. And Des O'Connor's timing in those sketches, with those scripted sketches, every last comma, pause, and glance was scripted, was spot on. And it was just a joy to have had some knowledge of him.
Yeah, it's the end of an era, and he will be sadly missed. A great man, and a very nice man as well.
Very nice.
Let's move on to more. I was about to say mundane events, but it's not mundane. You wrote brilliantly in the Daily Express yesterday in yours and Judy's excellent column, best thing in the paper every week, without fail. And I'm not just saying that. Your lead was about the Bashir Gate affair, pointing out that the Martin Bashir debacle, if you like, the way that he clearly used rather underhand techniques to lure or set a trap for Princess Diana and lure her into that iconic interview 25 years ago that changed the whole course of the way we cover the royals, our attitude to the royals, and in fact changed the rest of her life. you quite rightly, I think, said it's not so much the sins of what happened at the time, just like Watergate, it's the sort of cover-up that happened afterwards.
Yes, and I don't think there's any sort of about it. It's absolutely clear that there was a cover-up very soon after that interview was transmitted. I mean, I think we've all known for a long time, it was an exclusive in the Men on Sunday years ago, that Martin Bashir commissioned a forgery. He commissioned a forgery of this bank statement, which purported to show that confidants of Princess Diana were leaking stories about her, both to the media for money and to the security services for money, and that's been admitted by the BBC. What they haven't done is to accept the scale of that crime, because a lot of people are saying that it was actually a crime. I've just got a quote here, actually, in one of the papers yesterday from Di Davids. He was the former head of Royal Protection, and this is a quote from him. It was in a number of papers yesterday. He says, really, the facts speak for themselves. There is an admission by the BBC that fake documents were used. So why are the Met, he means the fraud squad, not investigating? It seems, I'm still quoting him, it seems straightforward that Mr. Bashir, on behalf of the BBC, used a forged instrument in order to gain an advantage. There is a bona fide case of fraud by false representation under the Fraud Act. As for this sudden discovery of the crucial letter, he means the letter that Diana wrote to the BBC saying that she was happy with the way the interview was got from her, that she was persuaded to give it, and it went missing, as we know. The BBC said they couldn't find it. It suddenly reappeared a couple of days ago. He says this letter should be handed to the police as important evidence of needing forensic examination. And of course, what he means by that is he's suggesting that possibly the letters are fraud as well. I mean, if the bank statement was a fraud, and bank statements are very difficult to make up to look realistic, and this one looked totally realistic. Why not a letter? And that's something he's absolutely right that needs to be investigated. But at the time, when all this came to light, the BBC simply said that the fraudulent document of the bank statement basically wasn't important. It wasn't actually used for anything. It was prepared for sort of some other purpose, but it never sort of saw the light of day. Now, Earl Spencer, Diana's brother and her gatekeeper,
he begs to differ, doesn't he?
He more than begs to differ. He's a journalist by profession, Earl Spencer, and he made contemporaneous and full notes at the time that Bashir approached him. Yes, of course, he showed the statement to the false statement to Earl Spencer. Earl Spencer was completely taken in by it, and I'm not surprised because it totally looks like the real thing. Mm-hmm. He then said on the strength of it, he thought on the strength of it, my God, my sister's being betrayed by the people who are closest to her, and effected an introduction. And Bashir got through the net. He got his meeting with Diana. And at that meeting, and these are the notes that Spencer took, according to him, Bashir just spun an extraordinary web of lies about what was happening to Diana. He was apparently alleging that the Queen was going to abdicate in 6 months. He had that on the highest authority. That Prince Charles was going to become king. He actually said that there was a plot to murder Diana to get her out of the way. I mean, total fantasy, wicked fantasy. And Spencer, during this meeting, absolutely in his head, he dismissed Bashir as a fantasist. And when the meeting was over, he basically said to his sister, well, obviously the guy's nuts. You can't be interviewed by him. But Diana, who was very vulnerable, and Bashir knew this and played on her weaknesses and her paranoia at the time, she actually swallowed the bait, hook, line and sinker, and she gave the interview. And there are many people, and this was a front page story in the Express yesterday, there are many people, friends and confidants of Diana, who are prepared to go on the record, and they are quoted as saying that interview was the first step in Diana's dance of death. Yes. It led her to that tunnel in Paris, because it meant that when the interview had gone out and she said such extraordinary things, the Queen instructed the two of them to get divorced, and they did. Diana lost her royal protection. She lost her drivers. She lost well-trained policemen who could have advised her on the way to look after herself. Mm-hmm. And she ended up being chauffeured by a drunk driver into a French tunnel, trying to outrun the paparazzi, which anybody who's ever been chased by the paparazzi will tell you can't. It's not possible. And he drove into a pillar, and everyone in the car except one person was killed. And that would not have happened, people are saying, and I agree with them, if it hadn't been for that interview.
That was her friend, the magazine editor, Tina Brown, speaking yesterday in the Express. Yeah, it was a very powerful piece, that very powerful story. Just before we move on, that letter that the BBC, first of all, I find it rather strange that Princess Di would write a letter saying, "Oh, you know what? I know you conned me with these fake bank statements and all your lies, but I just thought I'd drop you you a line to say I'm absolutely cool with that. That was really great. So I just
you.
think the whole idea of the letter seems to me strange. Then, of course, the BBC announced that mysteriously they'd lost it. And then suddenly, as the furor erupts over the past week, hooray, we found it. Now, this is an organisation, or at least Panorama is an organisation that Panorama admits that it regularly used this guy to forge things like bank statements. So why wouldn't this letter be a forgery as well? My bet was if they do produce this, it will be examined very much as a potential forgery, and it sounds to me like it probably is.
And also, I mean, my analogy to Watergate, which is where we sort of came in, I think is a pretty clear parallel, because what happened, as we all remember in Watergate, was there was a botched burglary at the Watergate, which was the Democrats' headquarters at the time, by the Republican Party. It didn't really work, and it didn't really come out for a while. And when it did, Nixon, who had known about it, decided to lie about it and decided to basically whitewash it and cover it up and cover it up and cover it up, lie after lie after lie. And in the end, he was very nearly impeached, and he had to resign in disgrace with his reputation in tatters. Now, the parallel with the way that the BBC, which in many ways is, and I mean this, I'm not being ironic, is a fine organisation, and I support and love the BBC. I think it's an extremely valuable part of our unwritten constitution almost. But the way the BBC have behaved over this, going back to 1995, 96, and now, is very reminiscent of Watergate. They don't seem able to accept that something bad has happened and to do the sensible thing, and that's the lesson of Watergate. You hold your hands up straight away and you say, we totally screwed up, we're very sorry, and we're going to take action to compensate for that.
So
they
right.
They're still trying to cover. For example, this letter.
Yep.
The BBC press office announced that it had been discovered a couple of days ago, and the immediate questions that all journalists asked the BBC press office was, well, where was it and who found it? And they won't answer.
By the way, Richard, this is also the organisation that announced that Mr. Bashir was too ill to comment because he has terrible COVID-19. Then we learnt that actually also he's had heart surgery, far too ill to comment. Last Sunday's Mail on Sunday, there he is walking down the street with a bag full of wine, bottles of wine, and an Indian takeaway, not looking too near death's door, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, and I've also heard from a very well-placed source that he was seen elsewhere having lunch at a London club some time ago. So yes, you've got this continuing cover-up. Why won't they tell us where the letter was? Why won't they show us the letter? You know, let's hold it up and let's have a look at it. Why won't they why won't they stop defending Bashir's illness and using it as an excuse for him not to give a statement when he's clearly perfectly okay? He can clearly give a statement. I mean, he may be recovering, but if he's walking around the streets in his overcoat and his mask on and carrying 2 shopping bags, he can give an interview. He could give an interview from his bed. So they're still covering, and that I can't understand, because as Earl Spencer said in his fantastic public letter that he sent to the new DG, he said, I promise you, I'm not letting this rest. And I promise you that this is all going to come out. And if I'd had that letter, I would be looking at the known facts so far and thinking, this guy's right, and we need to stop this cover up right now. And we need to come out and come clean today. I agree. It's always been the BBC's problem. It has an urge towards secrecy. It always tries to keep its affairs under wraps. And that was the problem with Jimmy Savile. And that will be the problem here. It is the continuing problem here. And Spencer has demanded an external independent inquiry because he doesn't trust the BBC to police itself, and I agree with him there. And the BBC has accepted this, and as Lord Grey, the former BBC boss, said last weekend, this is one of the darkest days for the BBC, that this is a massive cloud hanging over it, and it is going to undermine one of the most legendary television interviews of all time. It is already undermined, and that's kind of a shame, but they should never have behaved like that in the first place, whatever. Just one more quick point. I know where you want to move on. One more quick point about this letter Diana allegedly wrote, and it's very, as you say, it's a very curious concept. Actually, if you just step back from the fact that it's mysteriously disappeared and mysteriously reappeared, and is it real? Actually, I personally don't think it matters much either way. I mean, it's a detail in the story, but I don't see how a letter from her, even if it's genuine, alters what led up to that. It doesn't change any of the facts. It doesn't change the fact that these bank statements were forged. It doesn't changed these very, very well-sourced allegations from Earl Spencer against Bashir that he told a pack of lies to Diana. That letter doesn't change anything. It doesn't have any legal bearing on the situation at all. And I do agree. I do think that the former head of the protection squad is right. I don't see why the fraud squad shouldn't be looking at this, because this is a very serious potentially criminal offence.
Yeah, we hear Bashir is set to sort of step down as the religious affairs correspondent at the BBC. He says he's going to retire. It's a sad way to retire, according to friends. But as you say, it may end up being worse than a retirement for Mr. Bashir. He may get his collar felt if he's not too careful. Let's move on. You want to talk about and I agree with you, the national pretend lockdown. It is strange, this lockdown. You and I, of course, are not convinced that lockdowns are a good idea, to put it mildly. We're against them, but we're stuck with this second lockdown. But it doesn't half feel different to the first one, doesn't it?
And it looks different. I mean, you and I live in roughly the same part of North London, and I'm sure you've noticed it. I was out in our high street yesterday at about 3 p.m, just as it was starting to get dark, and it looked like Christmas, to be honest. I mean, it was absolutely, no, really, it did. It was, the Christmas lights were on, and it was thronged with people. And what I really noticed was something that I spotted on Hampstead Heath and at Highgate last Sunday when I went out for a walk. There are an awful lot of family groups that seem to be made up of siblings numbering about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And they all seem to be roughly in the same age bracket. They're either in their late teens or their 20s or 30s. And what's obviously happening...
Not necessarily the same race.
Very good point. And also, a surprise, suddenly, the elderly parents are emerging from God knows where they've been hiding, who actually, to me, look like grandparents pushing their grandchildren along. But no, I suppose that, if everyone's obeying lockdown, they must be... Maybe they've adopted late, who knows? But no, it is, joking aside, it is perfectly obvious that large numbers of people are pretty much ignoring this lockdown. And that's what happens when governments lie to people. That's what happens when government scientists spin the facts. I think the last straw was the press conference to announce this current lockdown, where we were given figures which within hours, other experts had shown to be weeks out of date. And the two experts, Whitty and Balance, who produced them to frighten us, to kind of shove us into agreement for another lockdown, and had shown them to Boris Johnson, who presumably was conned by them as well. The sole purpose was to win the argument for lockdown. But you can't do that with bent information, because when it gets out, people in the end will stop trusting those who are giving us the information. And I think that's what's happened. I think back in March, I trusted Whitty and Valance. Every time I saw Whitty, I thought he was a really decent guy, and I thought he was talking sense, and I was with him, and I was with the lockdown back in March. But now, like I'm sure millions of others, when I see those two glumsters in chief appearing on the screen, and actually I've noticed they've not appeared very much in the last few days, have they?
No.
But I straight away, my cynicism goes on full alert, because I don't trust them. They've told us so many faulty lies. I don't trust them anymore. So if this lockdown is based on their say-so, I don't trust the lockdown. Now, I'm not breaking lockdown, but I don't blame people for doing it, because the British public are very patient, and they're very orderly, and they're law-abiding. But laws can only be affected by the consent of the people. And I think that the government has lost the consent of the people. I mean, you can see it in the parks, you can see it on the high street. Just look at the shops.
Don't forget, Richard, we're supposed to be told to stay at home. No one is staying at home. That's absolutely clear and present. Last point, Richard.
I'm looking out of my window here at the Heath extension, and I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's people playing football. There are people walking dogs, in groups. I can see it right now with my own eyes. And look at all the shops that have stayed open that were closed last time. Yeah. So many shops have found little kind of wrinkles under the regulations. That's right. They're staying open, so the high streets are much busier.
Indeed. Last question. Boris Johnson, there's a new Praetorian Guard at number 10 Downing Street. His old influencers, Dominic Cummings and Lee Kane, have left. His new influencers are supposed to be Carrie Simons, Allegra Stratton and Munira Mirza, the Ladies Committee of Downing Street, they're calling them. So a different direction. Now, Dominic Cummings is the guy that made Boris drone on about we're following the science. Now, what we've come to realise, and I know you and I agree on this, there is no such thing as the science. There is a whole other body of scientific opinion that dictates that we don't need lockdowns, that they do more harm than good, protect the vulnerable, the rest of us get back to normal. Do you think now that his old influences have gone, that Boris Johnson might listen to a different scientific viewpoint?
I certainly hope so, and I think that the ground's been laid for that now. I think the fact that he's got rid of these people who were so narrow-minded and making him take advice from such a narrow element of the scientific base, I think it's a good sign. If he can get rid of that lot of people and have a broader base politically to listen to, then surely he can do the same thing with the science. I mean, my God, it's not just us, Kevin. It's not like journalists like us who are cynical by nature. The World Health Organization is telling governments not to lock down.
I know.
The World Health Organization says that it's counterproductive and it causes more harm than good. Why doesn't the Prime Minister listen to the WHO? Why is he listening to two blown fuses, Whitty and Valence? So yes, fingers crossed, it's a good sign, and we might see in the next few weeks a shift and a much broader tent, a much larger tent of scientific advice being taken into account. Fingers crossed. Anyway.
I just hope that we get the hell out of lockdown on December the 2nd as promised. We cannot carry on like this. Richard, thank you so much for your time on a Sunday morning. I hope to talk to you very, very soon again.